Callie had always loved Christmas morning. As a child, she'd wake up early, rushing to the living room where her parents were waiting. The scent of hot cocoa in the air and the soft hum of Christmas music in the background. But this year was different. Callie was far from home, driving alone through the snow-covered backroads of Colorado, desperate to make it to her sister's house by sunrise. The snowstorm had come out of nowhere. At first, it had been light flurries, the kind that gave the world a magical, glittering glow. But as the hours passed, the flurries turned into heavy, blinding sheets of snow. Her windshield wipers struggled to keep up, and the road ahead disappeared into a white void. "This was a mistake," Callie muttered, gripping the steering wheel tightly. Her knuckles turned white as she squinted through the windshield, hoping to spot any sign of life. Another car, a house, anything. But there was nothing, just the snow and the endless dark. Her phone's GPS had stopped working miles ago, leaving her hopelessly lost. The only sounds were the howling wind and the soft crunch of tires over the fresh snow. Then suddenly the car lurched. Callie's heart jumped as the dashboard lit up with warnings. The car stuttered, slowed, and then came to a complete stop. "No, no, no," she whispered, turning the key in the ignition again. The engine sputtered but refused to start. Callie sat there, staring at the empty road ahead. The silence inside the car felt suffocating. She glanced at her phone. No signal, not even a single bar. Taking a deep breath, she wrapped her coat tighter around herself and prepared to wait. Someone would come eventually, right? Minutes turned into what felt like hours. The temperature in the car began to drop, and Callie could see her breath fogging up the air. She tried to distract herself, scrolling through old photos on her phone, but the battery was already dangerously low. And then she saw it. First, she thought it was her imagination. A dark shape, barely visible through the swirling snow, moving along the road behind her car. Callie blinked, pressing her face closer to the frosted window. The figure was tall, unnaturally tall, and walking slowly toward her. Finally, she muttered, her relief turning into nervous laughter. She grabbed her coat, ready to step out and ask for help. But as the figure got closer, something didn't feel right. The way it moved, it was deliberate, almost mechanical, as if it weren't walking but gliding through the snow. Callie froze, her hand hovering over the door handle. The figure was still too far away to make out any details, but she could see its silhouette now. Broad shoulders, impossibly long arms that hung unnaturally low. Her heart began to race. "Maybe it's just someone in a coat," she whispered to herself. "A hiker, or someone who got lost like me." But the figure kept moving, slowly but steadily, straight toward her car. It was close enough now that she could see its head, tilted at an odd angle, as if it were studying her. Callie locked the doors. The figure stopped. It stood there, no more than 10 feet from the driver's side window, its face hidden in shadow. Callie's breath caught in her throat as the realization hit her. It wasn't wearing a coat. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't human. The creature leaned forward, its face coming into view. Callie screamed. Its eyes were sunken, glowing faintly in the dark, and its skin was pale and cracked, like porcelain left out in the cold for too long. It pressed a long, claw-like hand against the window, the glass fogging up under its touch. Callie scrambled for her keys, her fingers trembling as she tried the ignition again. The car sputtered to life and she slammed her foot on the gas. The tires spun uselessly in the snow. "Come on! Come on!" she cried, glancing back at the window. The The figure was gone. Her chest heaved as she scanned the area, her eyes darting between the side mirrors and the rearview mirror. The road was empty again. But then she heard it, a soft scraping sound, like nails dragging across metal. Callie's blood ran cold. The sound was coming from the roof. She didn't wait to find out what would happen next. She threw open the driver's side door and bolted into the snow, the icy wind biting at her face. She ran blindly, her boots sinking into the drifts, until she spotted a faint light in the distance. A farmhouse. The scraping sound followed her, growing louder, more frantic. She didn't dare look back. By the time she reached the farmhouse, her lungs burned and her legs felt like they would give out. She pounded on the door, screaming for help. An older man opened it, his face filled with concern. "There's something out there," Callie cried, collapsing into his arms. The man pulled her inside and locked the door behind her. He grabbed his shotgun and stepped onto the porch, scanning the dark. But the snowstorm had swallowed whatever was out there. To this day, Callie doesn't know what she saw on that desolate Christmas morning. But every winter, when the snow starts to fall, she refuses to drive alone, just in case it's still out there. Amber and Kyle were thrilled to spend their first Christmas morning as a married couple in a cozy Airbnb cabin deep in the mountains of Vermont. It was a dream getaway. No distractions, no responsibilities, just the two of them celebrating the holiday surrounded by snow and silence. The cabin was charming, with its rustic wooden beams, a fireplace adorned with Christmas stockings, and a brightly decorated tree in the corner. Outside, a thick blanket of snow muffled the world, making the cabin feel like a peaceful escape from reality. "It's perfect," Amber said, smiling as she set their small pile of wrapped presents under the tree. Kyle kissed her cheek. "Told you this was a good idea." As the couple settled in for the night on Christmas Eve, the fire crackled softly, and the smell of fresh pine filled the air. They laughed over mugs of spiked hot cocoa, taking in the picturesque scene around them. But as the night wore on, the cabin didn't feel as cozy anymore. Amber was the first to notice the sound, a faint creaking, like someone stepping on old wooden floorboards. She sat up on the couch, her mug of cocoa still in her hands. "Did you hear that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Kyle glanced up from his phone. "Hear what?" "That noise." It sounded like footsteps. Kyle chuckled. "It's an old cabin, babe. The wood's just settling." Amber frowned, unconvinced. The sound had been too deliberate, too rhythmic. But she brushed it off, not wanting to ruin the evening. Later that night, after they'd gone to bed, the noises started again. Amber woke up to a soft thud, followed by another creak. "Kyle," she whispered, nudging him awake. He groaned, half asleep. "What?" "Someone's in the cabin," she said, her voice trembling. Kyle sat up, listening. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, they both heard it, the unmistakable sound of something heavy dragging across the floor. Kyle grabbed the small flashlight he'd brought with him and climbed out of bed. "Stay here," he said, trying to sound braver than he felt. Amber clutched the blankets, her heart pounding as she watched him step out into the dark hallway. The living room was empty, but something was off. The Christmas tree lights, which they'd left twinkling when they went to bed, were now off. A few ornaments lay scattered on the floor, shattered into pieces. Kyle scanned the room with the flashlight. "Probably just the wind," he muttered to himself. But as he turned to head back to the bedroom, The beam of light caught something on the far wall, a handprint smudged into the frost on the window. It was large, far larger than his own, and streaked downward as if someone had pressed their hand against the glass and then dragged it down slowly. Kyle's stomach turned. He hurried back to the bedroom, locking the door behind him. "What happened?" Amber asked, her voice shaking. "Nothing. Just an animal." Maybe he lied, not wanting to scare her. But neither of them slept that night. The next morning, Christmas Day, they woke to a freezing cabin. The fire had gone out sometime during the night, and the heater wasn't working. Kyle got up to investigate while Amber stayed in bed, trying to shake off the unease that had settled over her. When Kyle reached the living room, he froze. The presents they'd placed under the tree were gone. The stockings were ripped from the fireplace and tossed haphazardly onto the floor. And in the middle of the room, scrawled into the frost on the coffee table, was a single word: leave. Kyle backed away slowly, his mind racing. Could someone have broken in? But the door was still locked, and the snow outside showed no footprints other than their own. Amber screamed from the bedroom. Kyle ran back, finding her standing by the window, her face pale. She pointed to the frost-covered glass. There, written in jagged, uneven letters, were the words, "I'm still here." They didn't bother packing. Throwing on their coats and boots, they bolted out of the cabin and into their car. The snowstorm made driving treacherous, but they didn't care. They just needed to get away. When they were safely back in town, Amber called the Airbnb host to report what had happened. The host sounded confused at first, but then they said something that sent chills down her spine. "I think you're mistaken," the host said. "I haven't rented out that cabin in months. It's been empty since last fall." Amber hung up, her hands trembling. She and Kyle stared at each other, the same question lingering in their minds. If no one was supposed to be in the cabin, then who or what had been there with them? To this day, Amber refuses to stay in isolated cabins, especially during the holidays. She still wonders if they had stayed even a moment longer, what might have happened. Some Christmas mornings are meant to be magical, but for Amber and Kyle, this one became their worst nightmare. For the Wilson family, Christmas morning was always a big deal. The house smelled of cinnamon rolls baking in the oven. The tree sparkled with lights, and the kids, Liam, age 10, and his sister Emily, age 8, were bursting with excitement. This year was no different. "Okay, kids," their dad Mark said with a smile. "Go ahead. Open your presents." The living room was filled with laughter and the tearing of wrapping paper. Mark and his wife, Sarah, watched from the couch, sipping coffee and enjoying the holiday cheer. But as the kids tore into their gifts, a strange sound interrupted the festive moment. It was faint at first, like a soft scratching noise coming from somewhere nearby. Sarah glanced toward the fireplace, frowning. "Did you hear that?" she asked. Mark tilted his head, listening. The sound came again, scratch, 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 like nails dragging against brick. "It's probably a squirrel or a bird stuck in the chimney," Mark said. "I'll check it out later." But the scratching didn't stop. As the family continued opening presents, the sound grew louder, more insistent. Now it wasn't just scratching, it was thumping. Heavy, deliberate thuds echoed from inside the chimney, making the ornaments on the mantel shake. "Maybe we should check it now," Sarah said nervously. Mark sighed, setting down his coffee. All right, let me take a look." He grabbed a flashlight and crouched by the fireplace. The kids stopped playing with their toys, watching as their dad leaned closer to the dark, sooty opening. "Hello," Mark called into the chimney, shining his light upward. "If it's an animal, just stay calm. I'll get you out." The flashlight beam flickered against the blackened bricks, illuminating nothing but dust and cobwebs. Mark squinted, tilting the light higher, and then he saw it. Two glinting eyes stared back at him from the darkness, too large to belong to any animal. Mark gasped, stumbling backward and dropping the flashlight. It rolled across the floor, its beam casting wild, erratic shadows across the room. "What is it?" Sarah asked, rushing to his side. I don't know," Mark stammered. "There's something in there, but it's not an animal." The scratching began again, louder this time. The sound was joined by something else, a low, guttural growl that reverberated through the room. "Kids, go to your rooms," Sarah said firmly, trying to stay calm. "But Mom," Liam began. "Now," she snapped. Reluctantly, Liam and Emily ran upstairs, clutching their toys. Mark grabbed the fireplace poker, gripping it tightly. He moved closer to the chimney, his pulse racing. The growling stopped. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, without warning, a pale, gnarled hand shot out of the fireplace, clawing at the edge of the hearth. Sarah screamed as the hand gripped the bricks, its fingers impossibly long and thin, the skin stretched tight over bone. Mark swung the poker at it, but the hand retreated into the shadows before he could make contact. "What the hell was that?" Sarah cried. Mark didn't answer. He was too busy staring at the fireplace, where a deep, gravelly voice was now whispering. The words were unintelligible, like a language he'd never heard before. And then came the smell. A rancid, overpowering stench filled the room, like rotting meat left out in the sun. Sarah gagged, covering her mouth and nose. "Mark, we need to leave," she said, her voice trembling. But Mark didn't move. His eyes were fixed on the fireplace, where something was emerging from the darkness. It crawled out slowly, dragging itself forward on all fours. Its body was grotesquely thin, with twisted limbs that bent in unnatural directions. Its face was gaunt, with hollow cheeks and eyes that burned like embers. It opened its mouth, revealing jagged, yellowed teeth, and let out a rasping breath that sounded almost like a laugh. Mark stumbled backward, pulling Sarah with him. The creature dragged itself fully out of the fireplace, its movements jerky and disjointed. It towered over them, its long arms nearly scraping the ceiling. Mark swung the poker again, but the creature caught it effortlessly, snapping it in half like a twig. It leaned closer, its face inches from Mark's, and whispered something he couldn't understand. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the creature turned and crawled back into the chimney, disappearing into the shadows. The Wilsons didn't wait to find out if it would return. Grabbing the kids, they fled the house, driving straight to Sarah's parents' home a few towns over. When they returned a few days later, the house was eerily quiet. But the fireplace was different. The bricks around it were cracked, and the entire room smelled faintly of ash and decay. Mark called a chimney sweep to inspect it. The man found nothing unusual, no animals, no debris. But he did find something chilling. Claw marks etched deep into the brick, as though something had been trying to climb out. The Wilson family never spent another Christmas in that house. To this day, they wonder what they saw that morning. Was it something supernatural? Something evil? Whatever it was, one thing is certain. It wasn't Santa coming down the chimney that Christmas morning.